Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Dole Institute of Politics for the program this afternoon. My name is Noah Hoekstra, and I'm a member of the Institute's Student Advisory Board, the official student group of the Institute. The SAB is a bipartisan group. As a member of the SAB, I get access to many great opportunities by being involved with the Institute. If you are a KU student and interested in joining, please contact us by emailing dolesab@ku.edu. For this afternoon's event, if you would like to know more about our guests, the event itself, upcoming Institute events, and more, you can download a printable program handout. The link is in the event description below. At the end of this afternoon's event, we will have time for you to ask questions of our guests. Please email your questions to dolequestions@ku.edu. And now, please join me in welcoming Audrey Coleman.
Thank you, Noah, for that warm introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you here, and welcome to the Digital Dole Institute. As Noah said, I'm Audrey Coleman. I'm Associate Director and Director of Museum and Archives here at the Institute, and thank you for joining us this afternoon, this blustery afternoon, for this second installment in a series that is inspired by our current exhibit at the Dole Institute, Voices from the Big First, 1961 to 1968. The exhibit and today's program were made possible by a grant from Humanities Kansas and inspired by their current initiative with the Smithsonian Institution, Crossroads, Change in Rural America. For those of you who might have visited the Institute to see the exhibit or seen any of our online features, you'll know that the exhibit is based on constituent mail written to Congressman Dole in the 1960s from his constituents in Western Kansas. Two of the topics that he received mail on and are prominently covered in the exhibit have to do with agricultural policy and community rural life and community sustainability, and of issues were of importance in 1960s and currently, of course, of concern and important to us today in 2021. And so I'm so pleased to have two guests with us today to discuss these issues. One is Trista Brown, who is Chief Operating Officer of Cattle Empire, a 2,100 head cattle ranch in Satana, Kansas, Southwest Kansas, and Frances Graves, who is the Wildcat District Director and a Community Vitality Agent with K-State Research and Extension, and she's based in Southeast Kansas. Thank you both for being with us so much. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I will remind our audience that you can submit questions at any time to our email address at dolequestions@ku.edu. Trista and Frances, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and for talking to our audience.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here, Audrey. Thank you.
So let's go ahead and get started by having each of you tell our audience a little bit more about yourselves and also the communities in which you live. Frances, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Sure. Well, I actually grew up in Northeast Kansas. I grew up in Shawnee and lived in Lawrence for about 11 years, got a couple of degrees, and then moved to Southeast Kansas where I am now. I've been here for 12 years. I married a farmer. Our girls, we have 3 daughters. They are the 6th generation in our ranching family. And currently I am the director of the Wildcat Research and Extension District, which is covering Crawford, Montgomery, Wilson, and Labette counties. The county I live in is Labette County, which has about 21,000 people, but the town that I actually live in is called Bartlett, and it has about 70 people total. So it's been a big change.
And Trista, tell us about Satana and your hometown.
Okay, hello. My name is Trista Brown Priest, and I am the 3rd generation here at Cattle Empire. I'm a lifer of Satana. Satana is in the very far southwest corner of the state. We're about 30 minutes from Oklahoma and about 60 from Colorado. So you can't get too much further and still be in Kansas. But anyway, we've lived here since I was 9. So basically my whole life. I did a couple stints at K-State. I have my undergrad from there in management and marketing. I graduated in 2008, which the students that are watching probably were kids then. But anyway, it was a terrible time to graduate. There were very few jobs available, but thankfully the family had a job for me. I came back and realized that I loved it here and wanted to make my career here. So I went back to K-State again to get my master's in business, ag econ, and finance. Graduated with that in 2012. I've been back full-time ever since. But our business, we're 51,000 head feed yard, custom feed yard here. I'm the third generation. We were started by my grandpa in 1978. My dad is our CEO, and he is actually a lawyer by trade. He worked ag bankruptcy law in Wichita, and that's where I was born and before I moved out here. And then he's been at the feed yard ever since. So I'm the third generation here at the feed yard. We care and feed for customers' animals from about 650 pounds up to 800 pounds until they are ready for harvest. So we take cattle and we get them to the packer, I guess. We don't do the harvesting. We just sell them to the people that do. We have about 60 employees here at the feed yard, and then my husband has a farm and my uncle has a farm. So between the two farms and the feed yard, we've got about 60 employees. We also have, my mom and I have a small rental house company. So we just have a few little businesses on the side like that. But our main job is the feed yard here. I guess my husband is also from K-State. He's a Northeastern Kansan, so I joke that I imported him. And we've got two kids. My daughter's 4, and we have a 10-month-old baby who's a boy. His name's Marshall.
Francis, thank you, Trista. Francis, would you tell us a little bit about your farming and ranching operation in Bartlett?
Sure. So kind of like Trista, we actually also buy the calves when they've been weaned from their moms. We don't raise our own cow-calf pairs. So we raise what's called a stalker steer mostly. Sometimes we get some heifers in, but it's mostly just those 400-pound weaned calves, and then we keep them for about 400 more pounds. And we have all grass pastures on our ranch, so we kind of just use rotational grazing to move them around and check on them every day. We give them a little bit of grain to make sure that they're healthy and strong, and keep an eye on them, make sure the count is right, and then send them on to those packers like Trista mentioned at the end of their cycle with us.
Mm-hmm. And the scale of your operation, is it much different than Trista's, or how many employees do you have? Or
we actually only have one employee. It's a family business, so my in-laws are the matriarch and patriarch, and then my husband works with them, and then we have one full-time ranch hand who's like family. So it's a very small operation. We manage about 2,000 head over the course of a year.
Okay. So if someone were to, is it exclusively, a ranching business like both of yours? Is it something that you tend to have to be born into and develop an interest in through that connection, or how do you become a rancher? I guess is my short question.
It's a good question. I think it's tricky to become a rancher.
How does it happen?
One at a time.
Yeah. We can talk about this more. And Trista, I'll let you answer this more as someone who's hands-on in the field. But, you really have to have a lot of investment into the infrastructure. You have to have a lot of equipment. You have to have a lot of land. You have to have all the tools, even just a basic feed truck to feed cattle, and the squeeze chute to give them their vaccinations and that sort of thing. That equipment's very expensive. So most of the time, if people are getting started, they'll work for another rancher and maybe build up their own operation slowly, or they'll go for it and get a loan. But it's very hard to break into the business without a family connection, I think. What do you think, Trista?
I would agree. We have a lot of employees, or several, and it's not easy. It's possible to work for a feed yard and become a manager and make a very good living that way. But to actually be the owner and the one on the hook with the bank or whoever, I would agree. It's pretty capital intensive. So it's pretty difficult to get in just by starting on your own.
Mm-hmm. And you both are acquainted. You got acquainted with through a program called the Carl program. Would you tell us a little bit more about that, Trista? I've got you on my screen, so I'll ask you.
Okay, yeah, the Carl program is Kansas Ag Rural Leadership Program, and it's a fantastic program. They take applications, and there's 30 people per class, and each class is 2 years, and you have, I believe, 9 in-person seminars, mostly within the state of Kansas. There's one international trip, and then one to a different state, a neighboring state or somewhere else, just to visit rural Kansas and learn about, our state and how to be a good community member. And there's a lot of personal development there too. Francis, I'm kind of stumbling, so help me out if you want to jump in. But it's a great program for networking and for learning more about different parts of our state, because we are a very diverse area.
It's a wonderful leadership program because it has that 2-year aspect to it. So it kind of creates this class or this cast to represent areas from across the state and develop those leaders in agriculture and business and just rural communities in general. So the networking and the friendships and the connections and the plans that you make while you're having those discussions are just as important as all the official trainings, I think.
Yeah. So you both mentioned just how, it sounds like there's a pretty high learning curve for having to do the work that you do, and also a significant costs involved in trying to get involved in this kind of work. When something comes along like a pandemic this year, something that we can all relate to, how has that affected your work and how you and your operations?
I guess from our perspective, agriculture was relatively not as impacted as it seemed like the cities were. Not to say that there weren't market disruptions, of course, but a lot of that seemed to mostly be on the customer side between the packers and the retailers. So the way it affected our business on the live cattle side is that the packers weren't able to take our cattle. When cattle are fat, they're fat and they need to go to the packer. We can't store those animals in some way. So the biggest impact that we saw personally was just having to figure out how to maintain the condition on cattle and not be able to send them to the packer right away when they needed to go. And I guess on the labor issue, it was a totally different situation there as far as making sure our employees were safe. Luckily, most of our jobs here are fairly solitary or outside. So we didn't have really any spread issues within our employee group. But of course, as people get sick, you need to give them that time off, and having enough people to support and be backup for that person is a challenge for every business. So nothing unique on that side, just challenging for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Francis, would you have any additional comments or perspectives on that?
I'd just add that just from the people that I work with now and with research and extension, a lot of our producers had a lot of trouble finding, like Trista mentioned, our small lockers. Like a small farmer might try to take a steer into the locker to get it processed. Those appointments typically would be 4 to 6 weeks out, and now they're 1 to 2 years out. It's kind of the same, mindset of stocking up on toilet paper. People kind of did that with meat as well. So everyone wanted their freezer full. So that was really challenging. But out of every challenge comes some awesome opportunities. And I think because our small lockers were so crowded, so maxed out, they have generated some of the federal spark fundings that we saw. They've expanded their businesses. They've been able to have more space. And then a lot of producers have diversified, and they've started offering their products straight to consumers, which has been pretty cool. There's a really great Facebook group called Shop Kansas Farms that a lot of our local producers have had success, networking with consumers to tell them, when they have certain cuts of beef for sale or half of a side of beef. And that's kind of been a growing market for some time now, but it really got even bigger during the pandemic, which is a happy little bit of news from the dark cloud of COVID, I think.
So, when we're looking at letters historically, so I'm not from a farming or a ranching background. And so, these kinds of issues and dynamics are very new to me personally. And I'm looking at them through the lens of historical documents and things like that. But the kinds of concerns that they have and the challenges that farmers and ranchers had in the 60s, they're talking about weather, they're talking about financial sustainability, they're talking about resource management. Do all of those sound like familiar issues to you? Are any of them in particular, of utmost concern in your operations? We could probably list lots of them, but let's pick one, and I'll ask you to start. What is one of your biggest challenges today? Trista, I'll pick on you.
Okay. Let's see. One of our biggest challenges. I don't know that it would qualify as our biggest challenge, but for sure one of our challenges here in Southwest Kansas or Western Kansas in general, we're on the aquifer here. So virtually all of our groundwater or all of our water comes from groundwater. It's a great place for feed yards for that reason, because we don't usually deal with mud. We get about 14 inches of rain per year here. So it's great for the cattle, but it's not great for farming. And we need farming to feed cattle with. So it's a very circular agricultural market here. Anyway, stick to the point. So on the aquifer, I am part of our local regional advisory committee for the Kansas Water Office for the governor's water vision, to try to help figure out how to make our aquifer more sustainable. Where we're at, at current usage levels, the aquifer will last 20 years or potentially less, not very long, especially when you're trying to create a generational business that, will hopefully live on in perpetuity. So trying to figure out what type of, technology is available, or what type of things we can do to help make that natural resource last longer is definitely one of our biggest long-term priorities. We've done a few things on the feed yard side. We feed a lot of silage here, which is the whole plant ground up. And we just use that basically as a substitute for hay or as a type of hay. Traditionally, most feed yards get that from corn silage. We are now getting ours from triticale, which is a winter crop, and sorghum silage, which is a summer crop, but requires less water than corn does. So we're trying to, neither of those silage crops are easy to transport. So it's something that we have to get from the local market. So we're trying to find lower water use alternatives for our partner farmers to grow that would work for our cattle. Whereas dry corn is not necessarily something that we have to get locally. Obviously, it's better for the local economy and it's cheaper for us if we can get it locally. But if we have to train it in or freight it in or something like that from places where it rains, that's possible. So we're just trying to focus on what we can do here. We do have a water reclamation system as well. In the winter, our water tanks and all the cattle pens, we put a small drip of water over into the plug of the water, I guess, to keep the tank from freezing. But we collect those drips and we filter the water and clean it, and then we can put it back through the cattle tanks. And that saves about 30% of our annual water usage just by recycling those drips that come from the water tanks. So those are three main ways that we're trying to help conserve or affect change on water policy.
Mm-hmm. This cold snap, you mentioned, water management during the weather. Did this cold snap that we had a couple of weeks ago here in the state, did that affect your operations adversely, or how do you handle that, or is that a concern over the winter?
It is. On the cattle side, as long as you can keep them fed and watered, Cattle are very resilient. Their happy temperature is about 30 to 40 degrees. So, as long as the cattle are dry, health-wise, they do okay. It's really an employee issue more than anything. Like I said, a lot of our employees work outside or on horseback or something like that. And at the cold temperatures that we had, it was just too cold. So we had a lot of guys, in trucks driving and making sure that our ice tanks or our water tanks were not iced over. And just focusing on basic animal husbandry of keeping the animals fed and watered and bedded as best we could without risking any human, without getting anybody too cold.
Francis, the farmers in your community, how does that affect the crops and any kinds of folks that you know and work with through K-State Extensions? How do they deal with extreme weather like we have, either in the summer when it gets over 100 degrees for a long period of time, or have a cold snap like we've had those 2 weeks here in Kansas?
I would guess that Kansas senators have the best mail received from constituents regarding weather, because it is always a huge concern and topic of conversation. So the most recent cold snap that we had was put tremendous difficulty on our small communities, just the infrastructure, but particularly our producers. I have neighbors. We have producers in our district who lost a lot of calves, who were producing. This is calving season, so the moms were going into labor during the ice storm, and there was such a small window, especially with that wind. There's such a small window of being able to grab those babies and try to make sure that everything was going to end up okay. So I give them a huge credit for the work that they do in every weather. The heat is just as intense. Sometimes, we have producers who have to bucket water out to their ponds when they've dried up. Our farm, we have these automatic waterers that are insulated. So this last cold snap, when it was so cold, just the littlest bit of wind could freeze it right back up again. So they were bucketing out teapots and coolers full of boiling water to try to unfreeze the weatherproof, supposedly weatherproof automatic waterers. People were bringing baby animals into their bathtubs and wrapping them in blankets. And the big concern I think that we've always had in farming and agriculture is that the margins for profit are just so low. So it doesn't take much for a small producer to be decimated, unfortunately. If they were calving right now and they were hoping to get 100 head of babies born this year, and we had that cold spell and it knocked out 2/3 of their projected herd, then that's a huge deal, and that farmer may go out of business. So I think that a lot of those issues that you saw in those early letters are definitely still around today, and always will be. That's just the nature of the business.
So as far as and Francis, I'll put this to you, since I've got you. Well, now I've got you both. Living with uncertainty, a lot of us who aren't as tied to agriculture, don't, maybe we remember, oh, we forgot our jacket, we and we're cold that day, or the weather doesn't affect us on a day-to-day basis, but that's an ongoing challenge for you. Is that something that's stressful, or is it something that you learn to just take as it comes, and there's a lot that goes into mental health, I would expect, and managing the stress related to that? Could you speak with that? Either one of you?
Ag stress, it's a huge issue for our producers. We see that, K-State's had some work in the last couple of years to try to put out some public service campaigns to help agricultural producers just feel more comfortable talking about it, because every farmer I know, the banknote that they carry for the loans, just because you purchase a whole herd, or you buy a bunch of seed, or you pay the co-op to fertilize your field, and it's an enormous amount of money that you often have to borrow from the bank, but then you're able to make that back with hopefully a little margin of profit there to support your family. So when you sell your crop, you can pay your bills. So if that crop doesn't come in, if it's hurt by weather or some sort of circumstance, some disease or something that you didn't anticipate, then the mental health toll is awful. It's a serious concern that people need to talk about more. But I think in general, the culture of farming is one, and maybe this is perhaps why we're not so quick to talk about it, is that such tough people of being able to turn on a dime and being able to be flexible and to make anything work and to deal with uncertainty on a daily basis. I really had to learn that lesson when I married into this family. Even things like vacations and, time away, you can't plan on that because you never know if something's going to pop up. If an animal is sick, if a gate is, a car has a wreck into a fence and you all of a sudden have to cancel all of your plans and rebuild that fence so your animals don't get out. There's just always a level of uncertainty in farming and ranching, and I think it makes us stronger, but I think we also have to be able to notice when that uncertainty might be taking a negative effect on our mental health, and definitely reach out to local healthcare resources or just talk to our friends and family if we ever need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Trista, do you have any comments or any feedback about that and how you manage personally?
I'm sure Audrey could see me nodding that whole time that Francis was talking. I definitely agree. I think it's fairly high stress, especially like she mentioned about the banknotes. In every farmer I've talked to, I mean, there's a personal guarantee on all of those loans as well. So if your business goes down, it's not just your business. Anything that you own personally is on the table, and that's pretty high stakes, especially when you're trying to have other things or support your family, like Francis was mentioning. One other thing that I think contributes a lot to the mental health or the mental load of agriculture is just the sense of identity. It kind of becomes who you are, and that's something that I experienced. I didn't mention this in my intro, but in 2018, our feed yard was about 4 times bigger than this. We had a one-time capacity of 250,000 head. We were the 5th largest feed yard in the country. As I mentioned, we're a family-owned business. We lost both my grandma and grandpa in 17 and 18. And it wasn't something that we had talked about which of my dad is one of 4, which of my aunts and uncles wanted to continue the business after my grandparents had passed. And the short version of that story is that none of them did. My dad was the only one that wanted to stay. So we liquidated 3/4 of our business in 2018. And we are still remaining 51,000 head as of 1/4 of our former size. And we love it. It's been great. It's been absolutely the right decision for our business, but it's very difficult going through that 2018 period, even for me. And I've only been working here or in the business since 20 years, not 40 years, not 60 years, like some of like my dad or some of our other family members or other farmers. But a huge part of who I am was a feed yard person, and the potential of that not being here, it really weighs on you. And I can't imagine, once it's been literally your entire life, once you're a 70-year-old farmer and you farmed for 50 years, that doesn't get any better. So I can imagine that that's a huge part of the mental toll, mental health issues in farming, is just how much of the personal brand you put on your farming business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we talked about sustainability in terms of natural resources, and we talked about water, and then you mentioned the sustainability, making rescaling and making your business more sustainable for now at this level. Trista, did you learn any lessons that are going through that process about how you might plan for the future, your operation? What do you see as the future of your feedlot? There's always lessons, especially in something that life-changing. I guess one of my biggest takeaways is that we thought we had done a good job of succession planning in our business and knowing what our plan would be when grandma and grandpa passed. And when push comes to shove, that wasn't what actually happened. So it's definitely something that
family businesses or agriculture need to make sure that they're talking more, I hesitate to say more seriously, because we were being serious, but to actually know what's going to happen, to have it be public knowledge, what's in somebody's will, who wants to stay, does this cousin want to come back, make sure that you're having regular touch base meetings with each other. Is definitely one big takeaway. A second one would be, as a family, we maybe didn't diversify as much. We had the feed yard, which was a huge business, but it was just one business, and if each sibling had their own part of that, maybe it would have felt differently. So to make sure we have more avenues of exposure, or more, diversify our risk a little bit in having different types of businesses and not just one really big business.
Mm-hmm. I want to remind our audience that in a few minutes, we'll open it up to audience questions, and you can submit those at dolequestions@ku.edu. But first, I want to talk more about sustainability and ask Francis, whether it's about farming or whether we're talking about sustainability of rural communities like your own, what are what do you work at Extension? What kind of initiatives are you taking? What kind of conversations are you having to keep your communities vital or revitalize them in some cases?
Definitely. One cool thing about research and extension is we have a presence in every county in Kansas, and the farm succession topic that Trista mentioned is really important. We have workshops and programs about that every year, as well as abilities for our producers to diversify. Like she mentioned as well, to think about, we had a workshop last year during COVID, during our quarantine period, of selling your beef online. Like, how do you do it? How do you set up your website? We connected people with the Small Business Development Center of Kansas and other community partners. As far as long-term sustainability for our communities, I'm a community vitality agent myself, and probably one of the biggest issues I see is that we really need to develop our rural broadband system. I know that's kind of a buzzword, and we've been talking about it for a while, but it's still a big deal. I'm right now looking at some remote online professional courses that maybe we can offer some of our counties to try to solicit workers to work for any company in the world right here from Southeast Kansas. But it's difficult to promote that service or to build your town to attract those type of residents if your broadband connection is 10 megabytes. So it's really a struggle, and I think we've all learned during this pandemic that it's just frustrating to try to do anything online when you don't have a strong signal. So for me, I think rural broadband is super important. Some of the issues we see with taxes and supporting our local communities, that continues to be an issue. I know some of the letters probably reference that, but there's a divide, I think, sometimes between the rural and urban areas and our smaller communities, without being able to attract new people to come and live here or to grow their businesses and to generate those tax revenues. We just don't have a lot of local support to pay for the roads and the schools and things that are just expenses of living. So sustainability is tricky. I trust our farmers and ranchers. I've living in this community for 12 years and being part of this industry. I think that farmers and ranchers have been some of the environmentalists and the most sustainable minded people for generations. We don't give them enough credit, because if they were to somehow lose their land, water, or their animals, or the health of their plants, then their family wouldn't be able to survive. So I've seen a lot of great innovations that they've developed, and changing the way they water things, changing the way they recycle plants and fields, and don't do things the same way we did it even 10 years ago. They're constantly evolving with new technologies and new tips and tricks, and those are also things we try to share through Extension.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Trista, related to your broader community, is your population relatively stable, or are you, do you have the services you need? Are there things that you wish you had?
I guess I'm not sure how much I talked about Satana earlier. Satana is about a town of 1,200 people. So we are a 1A school. We do have, in Satana, we have 3 restaurants and a grocery store and our school. So we do still have like basically all of the requirements. We're very fortunate to have a hospital here and a long-term care facility. So, while we're able to keep those things, I would say we are able to grow. The community of Satana, the population would be fairly stagnant, in my opinion. Garden City is our local big town, I suppose. It's about 40,000 people, and it's about 45 minutes north of here. And that town is growing a lot. That's where our Walmart and our Target and our Hobby Lobby and all the main things are there. So I would say most people go up there every other week or so, at least. So that area is growing a lot. Satana is not so much, but we're holding in there.
Well, I'll ask one question and then I'll open it up to the audience questions that we've got submitted. And Trista, I'll start with you. If you were to write your congressman or your senator, and you probably are in contact with them already on your own accord, but what kind of letter would you write, or what are some of the issues that you would ask for help or want to communicate to them about where you think they could make a difference?
Well, I don't know how much of a bomb you want me to drop in the last 3 minutes, but two of the biggest things we haven't talked about so far that matter to me and to our area. One is immigration. Our area in Southwest Kansas is vastly Hispanic majority. Whether those people are legal or not, or the people are legal or not, I guess I'm not going to speculate. But even when I graduated high school, our school was 80% Hispanic. So it's just a part of our life here that Spanish is everywhere, and that's totally fine. I mean, we've all embraced it. 2 of our 3 restaurants are Mexican food. So that's not a problem necessarily, but trying to find workers sometimes is. We do not use E-Verify here. We follow the letter of the law on the I-9s, but we do not use E-Verify. And a lot of our issues have come from not necessarily from our employees, but from their families. The people that are going to come work here and stay here and be the type of employees that we want. And we're a family company. So they have families. And if their families can't come here with them legally, that's a no-go for our people. So I talk to our Congress people a lot about immigration issues. And then the second one is more of just a personal issue, I suppose. My 4-year-old is a type 1 diabetic, and so she's insulin dependent. And we drive to Denver to the Children's Hospital to go to her quarterly endocrinologist appointments. And the price of insulin is just crazy. We have insurance through the feed yard, but the feed yard is self-employed. So while I personally am not shouldering a lot of the cost of that insulin, our business is. So it should not cost me $600 a month to keep my daughter alive. And that's, with not even factoring the costs of, her continuous glucose monitor or an insulin pump or anything like that. The insulin alone is $600. And that just, she's worth every penny, of course, but that's just not okay. So.
Mm-hmm. No, tough issues for sure.
Yeah.
Francis, what about your letter?
Well, that's a good question, Audrey. I would probably reach out to our national leaders and just try to explain the toll that being so polarized has taken on our communities. I have seen the political polarization has gotten so intense that it's affecting everything. Our communities are divided over the vaccine. They were divided over mask wearing. We have some proposed wind development that's ripping a community apart right now in my neighborhood. And I just feel like I would love to see more examples from our national politicians to listen to the people and find pragmatic solutions that transcend party politics, and just get back to finding solutions for our families and encouraging people to work together instead of demonize our enemies.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. All right. Well, I've got a question from Noah. And I'm going to pose this to both of you, so you can take turns, and somebody's going to have to jump in here. How do you balance the need for green agriculture with the business benefits of less environmentally friendly practices? So I think maybe just talking about the balance, talk more about the balance between resource use and resource management.
I'll jump in quickly, Trista, let you follow. I have just one kind of note on that, which is just to again reference those margins, that the profit margin is slim. So I think the balance for most producers, like I said, they're stewards of the land, but if that environmental option, if the newer environmental options, because like I said, we've always been trying to take the most environmentally friendly options just to keep our businesses going. But if the newer technology is the same price point or can be, comparable, then they're going to do it. They'll take it. And that's the balance. If it costs twice as much to use a different fertilizer, for example, then that probably would end up with no profit or a negative profit for that field. So I would say that the real pull for developing these technologies and these efforts would be to show the producers or to somehow subsidize that to where the cost is comparable, so that profit margin can still be maintained, at least for the small scale producers. How about you, Trista?
Well, I will struggle to not get on my soapbox here a little bit, but I would argue that beef production is fairly sustainable, or is sustainable as it is. One thing we didn't really talk about much is the beef life cycle. So cattle are on grass, mostly on ground that cannot be farmed. So basically unusable ground is where cattle graze most of the time until they come here. And like I mentioned, we don't feed that much grass to our cattle, mostly sorghum silage or silage and grain and other byproducts. One way that we are very sustainable here at the feed yard is that we feed a byproduct of ethanol plants. So it's dry distiller's grain is the product that we feed. And if it was not able to be fed to cattle, it's very high protein. So it's good for the cattle, but if it were not able to be fed to them, it would go to the landfill or have to have some other type of use. But the ethanol plants create a lot of it. And without cattle, there would not be much of an outlet for that. So my first argument would be that we are fairly sustainable. And like Francis said, we're always looking for a better way to do things as it is. So if there are more technologies available or anything like that, I would say that most farmers would embrace them, especially if it's not cost prohibitive.
Great. Okay, our next question is from Zach, and he asks, as corporate farming continues to increase its hold on agribusiness, how do you compete against these massive organizations? Trista, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So there's definitely a lot of niche options, especially like Francis was talking about with if you're selling direct to consumers. That's really a new, and not necessarily new, but it's really exploded in the last 18 months or so. One thing I think the way we differentiate ourselves is as a custom feed yard. A lot of those corporate feed yards are feeding company cattle. They do not have customers. So that's one thing that we do differently. And we can also offer a lot of personal attention to those people. So I'll try to stay focused, but I would say that there's ways to differentiate to compete with the big corporate guys. And that there's some people that just don't want to do business with the big people. There's, like if you're trying to buy a feed ingredient and they don't have 100 million tons of it to sell to a bigger feed yard, then that's when we can come in and we can use that product that's potentially more sustainable or more cost effective and be competitive that way. So there's ways to pick around the edges and make sure that you remain competitive even in a more corporate environment.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks,
Audrey.
Francis.
I'll just add real quick. I think people sometimes think of the term corporate farming as being this big boogeyman, and it, the more we know about giant corporations, the more scary they seem, of course. But I will say that a lot of corporate farming is also just kind of an access for smaller producers to get their product to market. So like during the Carl program, we toured a dairy and they exclusively sold, or actually this may have been a different Farm Bureau tour, but they exclusively sold all of their milk to a yogurt company. So they were part of that yogurt company. That yogurt company is a big corporate company. They have their suppliers, but their suppliers are actually just a series of smaller dairies. So, that's their business model, is they are part of that yogurt company. And people do that. There are people that raise chickens that way. There are people that all of their field crops go to a certain organization or company. So it's not necessarily the boogeyman that I think some people think.
Thanks, Francis. Another question from an audience member is a pretty specific one. Is antibiotic resistance in cattle a concern for your operations? Trista, you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's always a concern. There were a few years right after that big drought in Texas where it seemed like a lot of our antibiotics were not being very effective here at the feed yard. That seems to have gone away now, but we continue to focus on judicious use of antibiotics. We only give antibiotics to cattle that need them, that are sick, that our pen riders have pulled, and the vet at the hospital, they have a temperature. We verify that they have a temperature and they have some symptoms where they actually need an antibiotic. We don't just medicate the whole feed yard for fun. Kind of going back to that profit margin deal. I mean, it's the best thing to do for the cattle, and it's the best thing to do for our profit margin, because antibiotics are expensive. So people aren't going to waste important medicines if we don't have to.
Mm-hmm. Francis, any other comments or perspectives on that?
Well, I never really understood the medicines that we give to our animals before I started working and living with a farmer myself, I guess. And I'll echo what Trista said. A lot of what farmers on a large scale try to do is to create a product that's affordable. We want to have a safe and affordable food supply. If you have enough money to buy the special chicken or beef that has never had any antibiotic, then that's great, but it does cost quite a bit more. So in order to keep our animals alive, especially in the industries, which I can't speak for necessarily, but those high quantity industries like poultry, they're trying to keep all of those animals alive. So that's where you see those types of things emerging. But antibiotics, like Trista said, are expensive, so they're used very judiciously. And on our farm, we only use them when, just like I would my kids, if something was sick, if something happened, if we had a cold running through us, if there was a fever, then they can save the life of the animal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One more question. I think, Trista, this is probably directed at your comments regarding your workforce and maintaining and cultivating a workforce. Mark asks, what key resources for migrant workers do you think the state can support that would create an interest in fulfilling needed jobs in your area?
We do not have migrant workers, so that's kind of difficult for me to answer. We've looked into some of those H-2A type programs or something like that, and we are a year-round business, so we need employees 12 months of the year, not just 10. So I'm kind of struggling to answer that.
Sure.
Sorry, I don't have much input.
I suppose. No, that's fine. So another question that I had, and I wanted to ask both of you, obviously your operations are generational, and so many farming operations are generational. How do your children feel about farming, and would you encourage them to keep it going?
I'll have Francis answer that one. Mine are too little to have much of an opinion.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's really hard, because I think any parent can say that you don't really know exactly what you want your your children to develop their own senses of identity and to be successful and strong. So of course we would love for our girls, one of them at least, to maybe take on this way of life. But, we're just trying to roll with the punches as things evolve. And, my father-in-law, the current patriarch, has always been so wonderful and in sharing that, it's really important for kids to get away and see the world and then choose to come back if they'd like to. And that's what we did. So I'm hopeful that one of our kids will choose to do that as well, but that'll be up to them.
All right, another audience question. Are there any potential ecological disasters or events or challenges that concern you, and how might they be addressed?
Well, I think the weather is always a concern.
That's
Tornadoes.
Getting back to our Kansas roots. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about the weather quite a bit. The only other thing that comes to my mind is if the aquifer does run out. I mean, obviously that would be a big problem. I'm not sure that there really would be a solution at that point if we can't pump any groundwater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Francis, any other comments?
Yeah, I think there's a reason why a lot of rural communities are heavy faith-based communities, because things like tornadoes and, global warming and giant freak ice storms or floods, we see those every few years, and just try to pray through it. So there's nothing on the horizon that I could really say that people are fearing that they can't handle, but people are definitely scrambling after the last cold flash that we had to determine maybe if this happens again, what are we going to need to be better prepared.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I have one final question for you ladies. All right. And this is just a very general one, but what if anything would you want to communicate to someone who was not from your background, not from a rural background or a farming and ranching family? What would you want them to know, either about your operation or yourself or your lifestyle?
I'll jump in first.
Okay.
Just like I said about our congressional leaders, I think that we're more alike than we are different. And I definitely learned that being from an urban area and moving to a rural area. I think the things that we have in common are so great. And just be curious. Think about where your food comes from and the people that are actually producing it, because it's not just an anonymous product at the grocery store. It's a really cool industry, and the people that are keeping up with it in order to make it thriving are people who are smart, that have marketing and business skills that I never fully realized until I married into this industry. But just be curious and always seek to find that common ground between us and them, and look for opportunities to show your kids and teach others about it.
Thanks. Trista, any final thoughts from you?
I would agree. I think that, big picture, my message would be kind of what we've talked about today already. The food at your grocery store is safe. Farmers we're doing the best job we can. We're largely sustainable. And that if you have any questions, please ask the source and don't necessarily rely on, people spreading stories, or, always try to find a first-hand experience of something if you have questions about the topic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Trista, and thank you, Francis, so much for spending time with us this afternoon and sharing your expertise and helping us communicate across differences and learn more about, we're all Kansans, and it's really nice to be able to connect with you and understand our wider experience. So we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you guys. I'm looking forward to seeing other questions in the comments.
Yeah. So I think we'll go ahead, and I don't see any other audience questions. So we will go ahead and conclude there, but thanks again to Trista and Francis. It's been a great session. I want to thank you all for being with us this afternoon to learn more about contemporary issues in rural life and farming and ag. Next month will be our third installment of the series inspired by the exhibit. We'll be visiting with Dr. Robert Weems, a professor at Wichita State University. We'll be talking about Black entrepreneurs in the 1960s and the policies that shaped Black entrepreneurialism, and Kansas leaders who were at the forefront of Black enterprise during the 1960s. And then in May, we'll welcome former Senator Pat Roberts to talk about his experience representing the Big First and going back all the way to the 1960s and working with colleagues and representatives like Congressman Dole. Thanks again to Francis and Krista for joining us this afternoon, and all of you out there at home, be safe, and we will see you again soon. Take care.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Dole Institute of Politics for our program this afternoon. If you are a student and would like to join the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board, please contact us by emailing dolesab@ku.edu. Tonight, Tuesday, March 9th, we look forward to hosting Dr. Claire Potter and Dr. Renee Romano for their program, Historians on Hamilton, How a Blockbuster Musical is Restaging America's Past. You can access this program on the Dole Institute's YouTube channel, just like this afternoon's program. Refer to doleinstitute.org for up-to-date information on all of our upcoming programs. We hope you enjoyed this afternoon's program. Thank you, and we will virtually see you next time.